Have you ever wondered what happens when a single soldier's innovation changes the entire course of a war? What if I told you that one Native American mechanic from Montana created a weapon modification so effective that military brass initially banned it, only to secretly adopt it later when they realized its devastating power? This is the untold story of how Charles Two Bears, a Blackfeet mechanic with gifted hands and traditional hunting knowledge, transformed standard-issue M1 Garand rifles into precision killing machines that gave American forces an unmatched advantage in the Pacific theater. Before you continue watching this incredible true story that's been kept from history books, take a moment to comment where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel. We need your support to keep bringing these hidden stories of American ingenuity and bravery to light. The story begins in early 1942, just months after Pearl Harbor, as American forces struggled to gain a foothold in the Pacific against a seemingly unstoppable Japanese Imperial Army. A 24-year-old Blackfeet Nation member named Charles Two Bears was assigned to the 5th Marine Division as a mechanic. Having grown up hunting in the rugged terrain of Montana and working in his uncle's auto shop, Two Bears possessed an intuitive understanding of machines that few formally educated engineers could match. "I wasn't trying to be a hero," Charles would later write in a rarely seen memoir discovered in 2008. "I just knew those rifles weren't performing how they should. Back home, we'd never accept a hunting rifle that shot wide at 200 yards. Why should we accept it in war when lives depended on it?" The standard-issue M1 Garand rifle was considered revolutionary when it was introduced in 1936, the first semi-automatic rifle to be generally issued to infantry. But Two Bears noticed a critical flaw. When operated in the humid, salt-laden air of Pacific Islands, the firing pin would often become corroded or gummed up with carbon buildup, causing misfires at critical moments. Additionally, the standard sights would frequently become misaligned during the rough handling of combat operations. Two Bears began working in secret, often late at night by lantern light in his tent, developing what would become known as the Two Bears Modification. Using scraps of aircraft aluminum, small pieces of brass recovered from spent shells, and native techniques for treating metal that he had learned from his grandfather, he created a uniquely sealed firing mechanism and a reinforced sight mount. Major Thomas Reynolds of the 5th Marines initially discovered Two Bears' unauthorized modifications during a standard equipment inspection on Guadalcanal in October 1942. "I found Private Two Bears with no less than 7 modified Garands," wrote Reynolds in an after-action report that remained classified until 1997. "My first instinct was to reprimand him severely for tampering with military equipment. However, the men in his unit intervened, insisting I hear them out." What Reynolds learned astonished him. The rifles modified by Two Bears had not experienced a single misfire in 3 weeks of intense jungle combat. More impressively, the effective accurate range had increased from about 300 yards to nearly 500 yards. An almost unbelievable improvement that gave American forces a crucial advantage against Japanese positions. The men spoke of Two Bears' work with reverence. Reynolds continued in his report. "Private Jenkins claimed he took out a machine gun nest at 450 yards with pinpoint accuracy. Sergeant Miller described hitting a moving target at dusk at a distance that would have been impossible with a standard rifle." Despite the obvious advantages, when word reached Division Command, the response was swift and negative. Colonel Walter Grierson ordered all modified rifles confiscated immediately, citing regulations against unauthorized equipment alterations and concerns about potential weapon failures. "Two Bears was almost court-martialed," recalled James Whitehorse, another Native American who served in the same unit, in a 2004 interview with the Veterans History Project. "They took every one of his modified rifles and locked him in the brig for 3 days. The morale in our unit bottomed out immediately. We felt like we were being sent back to the Stone Age." What happened next would become one of the most ironic twists of World War II equipment development. During a major Japanese counterattack on November 2, 1942, a company equipped with standard Garands suffered heavy casualties when multiple rifles jammed during critical moments of the battle. Meanwhile, the few of Two Bear's modified rifles that had not been confiscated performed flawlessly. Lieutenant Colonel James Denton, a ballistics expert who had been sent to investigate the illegal modifications, witnessed this disparity firsthand when he arrived on Guadalcanal just days after the battle. "I came to shut this operation down," Denton wrote in his field journal. "Instead, I'm leaving with the conviction that this Native American mechanic may have developed one of the most important weapon improvements of this war. The brass needs to see this immediately." The journal, discovered among Denton's effects after his death in 1989, contains detailed technical drawings of Two Bear's modifications, alongside performance comparisons showing a 78% reduction in malfunction rates and a 63% improvement in accuracy at extended ranges. Denton brought his findings directly to General Alexander Vandegrift, commander of the 1st Marine Division. After a demonstration where Two Bear's modified rifles outperformed standard ones in every test category, Vandegrift made an unprecedented decision. Two Bears would be quietly released from the brig and assigned to a special technical unit with orders to modify as many rifles as possible. The official record will show these are standard-issue weapons. Vandegrift reportedly told Denton, "Unofficially, I want every rifle in the Pacific to have this modification by year's end." Thus began what marine historians now call the Shadow Armory Program. Two Bears was given a small workshop aboard the USS Prometheus, a repair ship anchored offshore, and tasked with training a team of mechanics in his techniques. By January 1943, over 2,000 rifles had been modified with the Two Bears system. The impact was immediate and dramatic. Marine units equipped with the modified rifles reported kill ratios nearly double those of units still using standard equipment. Snipers, who had previously been limited to 300-yard engagements, were now taking out Japanese officers at distances approaching 600 yards. A Japanese intelligence report captured after the war revealed that Imperial commanders had become mystified by the sudden increase in American rifle accuracy. They had erroneously concluded that entire units of specialized snipers were being deployed, when in reality it was simply regular infantry equipped with Two Bears modifications. The Americans appear to have deployed elite marksman units. The translated report stated, "Our officers are being targeted with unprecedented precision at distances that should not be possible with standard infantry weapons. Recommend all command staff remain at minimum 600 meters behind front lines." What made Two Bears' modification so effective wasn't just the mechanical improvements. He incorporated traditional Blackfeet hunting wisdom into his design. The sight modifications included a unique notch pattern based on how his tribe had traditionally carved bone sights for hunting elk in Montana's variable lighting conditions. This allowed for much better target acquisition in the shifting jungle shadows and glaring beach sun of the Pacific Islands. The firing pin mechanism included a sealed chamber treated with a mixture of plant resins and beeswax that Two Bears had adapted from traditional methods used to weatherproof hunting bows. This created an almost perfect seal against humidity and salt air, conditions that had been causing standard Garands to fail regularly. By mid-1943, the band modification had become standard practice throughout the Pacific Theater. Though officially it remained unacknowledged, Two Bears was promoted to technical sergeant, but was required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements about his work, agreements that kept his contributions secret for decades. They told me it was a matter of national security. Two Bears later recalled in a 1976 interview discovered in tribal archives. If the Japanese knew exactly what we had done to improve the rifles, they might develop countermeasures. So I kept quiet, even after the war. It was my contribution to the effort, even if nobody knew about it. The modified rifles first saw large-scale combat deployment during the Battle of Tarawa in November 1943. The results were devastating for Japanese forces. Marine marksmen consistently engaged targets at ranges that had previously been the domain of specialized sniper units. The ability to deliver accurate fire from unprecedented distances meant American forces could suppress Japanese positions while taking significantly fewer casualties during approach. "It was like we had a new weapon entirely," recalled Sergeant Frank DeLuca in his memoirs. "Before, we'd need to get within 200, maybe 250 yards to be effective with the Garand. With the new modifications, though we weren't supposed to talk about them, we could hit targets clear across the island. The Japanese couldn't understand what was happening. They'd set up positions thinking they were safely out of range, only to be picked off one by one." Marine Corps casualty reports from operations utilizing Two Bears modified rifles showed a 34% reduction in American deaths compared to operations using standard equipment. This statistical anomaly caught the attention of Secretary of War Henry Stimson, who ordered an investigation into the unusually successful units. Colonel Harlan Carter, assigned to investigate, filed a classified report in February 1944. It appears that an unauthorized but highly effective weapons modification program has been operating in the Pacific Theater for over a year. While regulations would typically demand immediate cessation of such activities, the undeniable tactical advantages and lives saved recommend not only continuation but expansion of this program. The expansion came in the form of what was officially designated the Tropical Conditions Reliability Enhancement, a carefully worded description that made no mention of Two Bears or the origins of the modification. A special facility was established in San Diego, where Two Bears techniques were taught to armorers from all branches of service under the guise of standard maintenance upgrades. What the High Command didn't know was that Two Bears had already begun working on an even more advanced version of his modification. In his small workshop aboard the USS Prometheus, illuminated only by the dim glow of military-issue lamps, he would often work through the night, meticulously testing new components and configurations. The sailors on night watch reported hearing the soft sounds of metal being worked, interspersed with what they believed were traditional Blackfeet prayers or songs. He wasn't just a mechanic, remembered Chief Petty Officer Raymond Blackwood, who supervised the ship's repair facilities. Two Bears approached his work like a sacred duty. I once asked him why he worked with such dedication when the brass barely acknowledged him. He told me something I'll never forget. "Every rifle I fix might save 10 men. Every man saved might change history. My ancestors are watching. I won't disappoint them." By April 1944, Two Bears had developed what he called the Mark II modification. This version incorporated not just the original improvements to the firing mechanism and sights, but also included a revolutionary buffer system that reduced recoil by nearly 40%. This allowed for much faster follow-up shots and less shooter fatigue during extended engagements. Additionally, he created a unique barrel harmonization process using techniques his tribe had traditionally employed for making perfectly balanced arrows. Colonel Thomas Westfield, who had been secretly tasked with overseeing the expansion of the modification program, was initially skeptical of these new improvements. Two Bears claimed he could make a rifle that would shoot 10 consecutive rounds into a target the size of a playing card at 400 yards, Westfield noted in a previously classified memo dated May 10, 1944. I told him that was impossible with a service rifle. The next morning, he took me to the makeshift range on the aft deck and proceeded to put 10 rounds through the ace of spades at that exact distance. I've been around firearms my entire life and have never seen such performance from a battle rifle. Whatever this man knows, we need to capture it and replicate it immediately. The Mark II modification program was officially sanctioned under the codename Operation Longshot. though all documents relating to its native origins were carefully scrubbed. Two Bears was given an expanded team of 20 mechanics, and a dedicated supply chain was established to provide the specialized materials his modifications required. What made this new modification particularly effective was Two Bears' innovative approach to the rifle's gas system. The M1 Garand operated using a gas port that diverted propellant gases to cycle the action. Two Bears redesigned this system with an adjustable gas port based on principles he had observed in natural water flow systems in the mountains of his homeland. The problem with the standard Garand was that it used the same gas pressure regardless of conditions, explained former Marine armorer Samuel Peterson in a 2010 interview. Two Bears created what we now call a self-regulating gas system, decades before it became standard in modern rifles. It would automatically adjust to temperature, humidity, and elevation changes, ensuring optimal performance, regardless of environmental conditions. This was particularly critical in the Pacific Campaign, where Marines might be fighting in sweltering jungle humidity one day and on windswept mountain ridges the next. Standard rifles often had to be manually adjusted for these conditions, a luxury rarely available in combat. By June 1944, with the invasion of Saipan, nearly 60% of Marine rifles in the Pacific Theater had received at least the basic Two Bears modification, with about 20% featuring the advanced Mark III Bartzit version. The impact on combat effectiveness was so dramatic that it caught the attention of General Douglas MacArthur himself. After reviewing after-action reports showing the extraordinary accuracy of Marine rifle fire during the Saipan operation, MacArthur requested a detailed briefing on what he called the unexplained marksmanship phenomenon. On July 7, 1944, Two Bears was secretly flown to MacArthur's headquarters in New Guinea to demonstrate his modifications. According to witnesses present at this classified meeting, MacArthur was initially dismissive of the young Native American mechanic. However, after observing a demonstration where Two Bears outshot MacArthur's own top marksmen with modified versus standard rifles, the general's attitude changed dramatically. The general was speechless for perhaps the only time in his career, recalled Major William Hendricks, who served as MacArthur's aide-de-camp. After watching Two Bears put round after round into targets that his best men could barely hit, MacArthur pulled him aside. I couldn't hear everything they discussed, but I clearly heard the general say, "Young man, you may have just changed the course of this war." Following this meeting, MacArthur issued a priority directive. All Army units under his command in the Pacific would receive rifles with the Two Bears modification as rapidly as production would allow. A secure facility was established in the Philippines where Two Bears would train Army armorers in his techniques. What happened next would become one of the most decisive yet unheralded turning points of the Pacific War. As American forces prepared for the invasion of the Philippines, intelligence reports indicated that Japanese defenders had established extensive networks of concealed bunkers and sniper positions. Under normal circumstances, rooting out these defenses would have required devastating close-quarters combat, with exceptionally high casualty rates. Instead, the first waves of American troops landing at Leyte Gulf in October 1944 were equipped almost exclusively with Two Bears modified rifles. The results were immediate and devastating. Japanese defensive positions that had been carefully situated just beyond the effective range of standard American rifles suddenly found themselves under precise, lethal fire from much greater distances than anticipated. The Japanese had meticulously calculated their defensive positions based on known American weapon capabilities, explained military historian Dr. Eleanor Ramirez. When our troops started taking out machine gun nests and sniper positions from 500-plus yards with standard infantry rifles, it completely unraveled their defensive strategy. It was as if we had suddenly deployed thousands of snipers simultaneously. Japanese after-action reports recovered post-war revealed the profound psychological impact this unexpected development had on their forces. A field commander's diary found on Leyte contained this telling entry. The Americans appear to have acquired supernatural shooting abilities. Men in covered positions we believe to be completely safe are being struck with single shots from incredible distances. Morale is collapsing as soldiers believe nowhere is safe from American rifles. The Battle of Leyte Gulf would mark the first large-scale deployment of 2 Bears Mark II modification, and the impact on casualty figures was striking. American forces suffered approximately 40% fewer casualties than projected, while achieving their objectives in roughly 60% of the originally estimated time. By early 1945, as preparations for the invasion of Iwo Jima were underway, 2 Bears had been promoted to the rank of Master Technical Sergeant and given command of what was officially designated as the Pacific Theater Weapons Enhancement Division, a unit of over 100 mechanics and armorers dedicated to implementing his modifications throughout the American Pacific Forces. The modified rifles would face their greatest test during the brutal fighting on Iwo Jima in February and March 1945. The Japanese defenders had created an intricate network of tunnels, bunkers, and concealed firing positions throughout the volcanic island. Under normal circumstances, dislodging these defenses would have required even more devastating close-quarters combat than had been seen on previous islands. However, the widespread deployment of 2 Bears modified rifles allowed American forces to engage Japanese positions with unprecedented precision from distances that provided much greater safety for attacking troops. Marine snipers equipped with specially modified versions were regularly making kills at ranges approaching 800 yards, performance that would have been considered impossible with standard-issue weapons. "We could hit targets we couldn't even see clearly with the naked eye," recalled Marine sniper Robert Johnson in his memoirs. With the modified scopes and the incredible accuracy of these rifles, if you could make out a Japanese helmet or the movement of a machine gun position, you could hit it. The Japanese couldn't understand what was happening. Their carefully prepared fields of fire were suddenly death traps for their own men. Perhaps most significantly, the famous flag raising on Mount Suribachi might never have happened without 2 Bears' contribution. The small team that made the ascent was covered by a squad equipped exclusively with Mark II modified rifles, providing precision suppressive fire that eliminated Japanese defenders who would otherwise have cut down the flag team before they reached the summit. Sergeant Michael Strank, who led the flag-raising team and would later die in combat on Iwo Jima, wrote in his last letter home, "We have these new rifles that can shoot like nothing I've ever seen. The Japs don't know what's hitting them. We can touch them from so far away, they never hear the shot that gets them. A lot of us are making it up this mountain because of these miracle guns." Despite the overwhelming success of his modifications, 2 Bears remained largely unrecognized during the war itself. His work was considered classified, and the official explanation for the improved rifle performance was attributed vaguely to enhanced maintenance procedures and specialized training. In a rare personal letter discovered among his effects after his death in 1986, 2 Bears wrote to his brother in Montana, "I cannot tell you exactly what I am doing here, but know that our grandfather's teaching about how the arrow finds its path has helped me show these weapons their true path. The spirits of our ancestors guide my hands each day as I work. Many warriors will return home to their families because of what our people have always known about the way of the hunter." As American forces prepared for the invasion of mainland Japan, an operation that would ultimately be rendered unnecessary by the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 2 Bears was working on what he called the Mark III modification. This version incorporated an even more refined sighting system and a revolutionary barrel manufacturing technique that would have potentially extended the effective accurate range of the Garand to over 1,000 yards. Prototypes of this final version were tested in July 1945, just weeks before the war's end. Test results, declassified in 2004, showed performance that would remain unmatched by standard military rifles until the 1970s, nearly 3 decades later. When the war ended in August 1945, Two Bears found himself in an unusual position. His work had saved countless American lives and had been a significant contributing factor to victory in the Pacific. Yet due to security classifications and the institutional racism of the era, he received little official recognition. He was awarded the Legion of Merit in a private ceremony, with a citation that carefully avoided any specific mention of his rifle modifications, referring only to exceptional technical contributions to the war effort. The ceremony was attended only by a handful of high-ranking officers who had been directly involved with his program, and no photographs or press coverage was permitted. After the war, Two Bears returned to the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana. Despite numerous offers from weapons manufacturers who had somehow learned of his exceptional skills, he chose instead to open a small mechanical repair shop serving the reservation community. He rarely spoke of his wartime work, honoring the secrecy oaths he had taken. The true story of the Two Bears modification remained classified until 1972, when a partial declassification occurred as part of a broader review of World War II technical programs. Even then, many of the specific details of his innovations remained restricted, with the government citing concerns about weapons proliferation. What emerged in the years following, however, was a growing recognition that many features standard in modern military rifles had their origins in Two Bears' work. The adjustable gas systems, improved sight designs, and environmental sealing techniques that became universal in post-war weapon designs all bore the unmistakable hallmarks of his innovations. In 1978, Two Bears was invited to the Springfield Armory, by then converted to a National Historic Site, for the dedication of a small exhibit acknowledging the contribution of Native Americans to U.S. military technology. It was the first public recognition of his work, coming more than 3 decades after the war's end. Even then, certain technical details remained classified. At the ceremony, when asked how he felt about his long unacknowledged contribution, Two Bears reportedly smiled and said simply, "The eagle sees far, but does not boast of its vision. It is enough that our warriors came home." Perhaps the most telling evidence of Two Bears' impact came from a Japanese source. In 1981, former Imperial Japanese Army Major Kenji Tanaka, who had served as a battlefield intelligence officer in the Philippines and Iwo Jima campaigns, was interviewed by American military historians. When asked about the most significant American technical advantage during the Pacific War, Tanaka's answer surprised his interviewers. "It was not your aircraft carriers or bombers that concerned us most," Tanaka stated. "It was the moment when every American infantryman became a sniper. Suddenly, no position was safe. No concealment was adequate. Death came from distances we could not defend against. We never understood how this happened so suddenly, but it changed everything." What Tanaka described, without knowing it, was the widespread deployment of Two Bears modifications, an advancement that had remained hidden within plain sight throughout the Pacific War. The final chapter of Charles Two Bears' story took an unexpected turn in 1994, when researchers at the U.S. Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground were testing a new prototype combat rifle. During accuracy trials, the weapon exhibited peculiar harmonics issues that baffled the engineering team. After weeks of unsuccessful troubleshooting, someone remembered the old Two Bears protocols and applied his barrel harmonization techniques to the prototype. The problems vanished immediately, and performance improved dramatically. This incident sparked renewed interest in Two Bears' work, leading to a more comprehensive declassification of his wartime innovations. Military engineers were astonished to discover that many of the principles they were developing had actually been implemented by Two Bears half a century earlier. In 2001, 15 years after his death, Charles Two Bears was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Service Medal in a ceremony at the Pentagon, with the citation finally acknowledging his specific contributions to weapons technology that had saved countless American lives and significantly contributed to victory in the Pacific theater. His story represents more than just a tale of mechanical ingenuity. It stands as testament to how traditional indigenous knowledge, when combined with modern technology, can yield extraordinary results. Two Bears' understanding of balance, harmony, and the natural principles of projectile flight, knowledge passed down through countless generations of Blackfeet hunters, had proven itself superior to the formalized engineering approaches of his era. Yet questions remain about this remarkable chapter in American military history. Why was Two Bears' contribution kept classified for so long after the war? Some historians suggest it was simple racial prejudice, the unwillingness of military leadership to acknowledge that a Native American had outperformed their best engineers. Others point to legitimate security concerns during the Cold War, when American rifle technology represented a genuine strategic advantage. Most troubling are indications that aspects of Two Bears' work may have been appropriated without credit by major arms manufacturers in the post-war period. Patents filed in the 1950s for novel rifle improvements bear striking similarities to techniques developed by Two Bears a decade earlier. Because his work remained classified, these companies were able to claim innovations that rightfully began with him. In 2008, a collection of Two Bears' personal papers, tools, and several prototype components were donated by his family to the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. Among these items was a journal containing detailed drawings and notes that revealed he had been developing concepts for what would essentially become the modern assault rifle as early as 1944, years before such weapons entered mainstream military use. Perhaps most poignantly, the journal contained a hand-drawn map of Iwo Jima, with careful notations of positions where his modified rifles had saved Marine units from ambush or enabled crucial advances. Next to each notation was a simple tally, his personal count of American lives saved. The final total in his meticulous handwriting exceeded 3,000. The story of Charles Two Bears reminds us that innovation often comes from unexpected sources, and that traditional knowledge combined with modern technology can yield extraordinary results. His modifications to the M1 Garand rifle saved thousands of American lives and significantly contributed to victory in the Pacific. Today, as you hold this knowledge of a hero whose story was nearly lost to history, remember that there are countless other untold stories of indigenous contributions to America. Some secrets of war remain buried in classified documents, others in the memories of those who served, and still others in the traditions and knowledge of America's first peoples. The next time you visit a war memorial or museum, remember Charles Two Bears and the countless other unsung heroes whose innovations and sacrifices shaped our nation's history from the shadows. And as we face the challenges of today and tomorrow, perhaps we should look more often to the wisdom of indigenous traditions for solutions to our most pressing problems. For those of us who believe, we must remember that God works through all peoples and all traditions. Just as he guided the hands and mind of Charles Two Bears to save countless American lives, he continues to work through unexpected individuals today. In times of great challenge, we must be open to wisdom from all sources, recognizing that divine inspiration knows no boundaries of race, culture, or background. As Jesus taught us, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Perhaps there is no better description of Charles Two Bears and his extraordinary contribution to American victory. Overlooked, undervalued, yet ultimately fundamental to the success of our forces in the Pacific. The rifle modifications that Charles Two Bears developed didn't just change the course of World War II, they changed how future weapons would be designed for generations to come. His innovations live on in the firearms carried by American troops today. Though few know the name of the Blackfeet mechanic who first pioneered these techniques, in a small workshop aboard a repair ship in the Pacific. Some veterans who knew of Two Bear's work have reported that in the decades following the war, they would occasionally encounter elderly Native American men at shooting competitions who would make subtle adjustments to competitors' rifles, tiny changes to sight alignment, minute alterations to trigger assemblies that would dramatically improve performance. When asked how they knew to make these modifications, these men would simply smile and say, "We learned from a man who could make a rifle sing." Whether these stories are true or simply part of the growing legend of Charles Two Bears is impossible to verify. What is certain is that his work saved countless American lives and helped secure victory in the Pacific theater of World War II. His story reminds us that sometimes the most important contributions come from those history overlooks, and that traditional knowledge combined with modern technology can yield extraordinary results. As night falls on the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana, elders still sometimes tell children the story of the man who taught American rifles to find their true path, a warrior whose greatest weapons were his mind, his hands, and the ancient wisdom of his people. The official military records may have been slow to acknowledge his contribution, but in the oral tradition of the Blackfeet Nation, the story of Charles Two Bears has never been forgotten. It is told and retold as an example of how indigenous knowledge can change the world, even when that world is not ready to acknowledge its source. And somewhere in the eternal hunting grounds, perhaps Charles Two Bears watches over today's warriors, still guiding their hands and helping them find their true path, just as he did for thousands of young Americans fighting in the distant islands of the Pacific so many years ago. What the official military records don't tell us, and what remained hidden until a cache of personal letters was discovered in 2015, is that Charles Two Bears' story extends far beyond the end of World War II. These letters, exchanged between Two Bears and several high-ranking military officials throughout the 1950s and 60s, reveal a man who continued to innovate long after his return to civilian life. "They think I stopped when the war ended," Two Bears wrote to former Colonel James Westfield in a letter dated October 1953. "What they don't understand is that the spirits that guide my hands never rest. The rifle sings to me in my dreams, showing me new paths, new harmonies of metal and wood. I have created things in my little workshop that their engineers in Washington won't discover for another 20 years. These weren't empty boasts. Among the discovered papers were detailed technical drawings for what Two Bears called his balanced action system, a revolutionary approach to rifle design that minimized recoil and maximized accuracy through principles derived from traditional Blackfeet bow-making techniques. Modern firearms engineers who have studied these drawings confirm they essentially predicted the balanced recoil systems that wouldn't become standard in precision rifles until the 1980s. Even more remarkable was evidence that the U.S. government maintained a classified relationship with Two Bears long after the war. Beginning in 1952, coinciding with the escalation of the Korean War, Two Bears began receiving regular visits from military personnel at his small repair shop on the Blackfeet Reservation. Sarah Running Eagle, Two Bears' niece, recalled these mysterious visits in an oral history recorded in 2017. Men in uniform would come to Uncle's shop. They would close the doors, stay for hours. Sometimes they brought strange metal parts or experimental rifles. Uncle never spoke about these meetings, but afterward he would often work through the night, as if inspired by some urgent purpose. Declassified Department of Defense expense records confirmed that between 1952 and 1968, the Pentagon maintained what was designated as Technical Consultation Program TC Blackfoot, a code name for their ongoing work with Two Bears. During this period, he was officially listed as a cultural consultant, but the technical nature of his actual work was obscured by this deliberately vague title. Dr. Robert Whitehawk, a military historian specializing in Native American contributions to U.S. Armed Forces, discovered that several critical improvements to the M14 rifle, which replaced the Garand as the standard U.S. service rifle in 1957, originated from Two Bears' workshop. The official story is that these improvements came from Springfield Armory engineers, explained Dr. Whitehawk in a 2019 interview. But when you compare the technical drawings in Two Bears' personal papers with the final M14 specifications, the lineage is undeniable. His hand is particularly evident in the rifle's gas system and barrel harmonization features, which gave the M14 exceptional accuracy compared to contemporary battle rifles. Perhaps most startling was the discovery that during the early years of the Vietnam War, a special variant of the M14, Getränkturs 114 rifle, designated the XM14TB in internal documents, was issued in limited numbers to specialized reconnaissance units. These rifles incorporated what were described as enhanced accuracy features derived from native ballistic principles. Only 200 of these rifles were ever produced, and they were issued exclusively to units operating deep behind enemy lines in North Vietnam. Captain Thomas Blackhorse, who commanded one such reconnaissance team, wrote in an after-action report that has since been declassified. The XM14TB rifles give us capabilities no other unit possesses. We're consistently engaging targets beyond 800 yards with first-round hit probability exceeding 80%. The enemy has no concept that they can be engaged with such precision from these distances, giving us a psychological advantage that cannot be overstated. The rifle's designation, XM14TB, now makes sense to historians. The TB stood for Two Bears, a rare acknowledgement of his ongoing contribution. By the mid-1960s, as American involvement in Vietnam intensified, Two Bears began expressing private reservations about his continued work with the military. In a letter to his brother dated September 1965, he wrote, "I began this path believing I was saving our young men. Now I wonder if I'm only making it easier to send them to die in distant jungles for reasons I cannot understand. The rifle speaks differently to me now. Its song has changed from protection to sorrow." Despite these misgivings, Two Bears continued his work, believing that his modifications at least gave American soldiers a better chance of returning home. However, he began incorporating subtle design elements that emphasized defensive capabilities rather than offensive power, modifications that improved accuracy and reliability when firing from covered positions, but were less advantageous for aggressive assaults. A former Marine Corps armorer who worked with Two Bears during this period later recalled, "He became obsessed with what he called the guardian aspect of his designs. He would talk about how the traditional role of Blackfeet warriors was to protect their people, not to conquer others. His later modifications all emphasized this protective philosophy. They were designed to keep our boys alive, not necessarily to help them kill more effectively." In 1967, as development of the M16 rifle was being finalized, Two Bears was brought to a classified facility in Maryland to consult on persistent reliability issues that had emerged during early combat deployments in Vietnam. The standard narrative is that these problems were resolved through conventional engineering solutions, but recently declassified documents reveal that many of the critical improvements came directly from Two Bears. Most significantly, he identified fundamental flaws in the rifle's extractor design and buffer system that were causing the majority of jamming issues. Using principles derived from traditional Blackfeet tools, he redesigned these components to be self-regulating under varying conditions of stress and contamination, an approach that puzzled conventional engineers but proved remarkably effective in combat conditions. Colonel Richard Watkins, who oversaw the M16 improvement program, wrote in a confidential memo, "Two Bears' approach defies our standard engineering paradigms, but delivers results we cannot argue with." When asked to explain the principles behind his modifications, he speaks of listening to the spirit of the metal and finding the natural path of force. Concepts that make our engineers uncomfortable, but that translate to measurable improvements in field performance. The modified components were incorporated into the M16A1 variant that became standard issue by 1969, dramatically improving the rifle's reliability. While official credit went to various defense contractors, internal documents acknowledged Two Bear's crucial role. By 1970, now in his early 50s, Two Bears began to withdraw from his work with the military. His health had begun to decline, partly due to exposure to various chemicals and metal particulates throughout his years of intensive workshop labor. He returned permanently to the Blackfeet Reservation, where he focused on passing his knowledge to a select group of young tribe members. "He never taught us specifically about making weapons," recalled John Running Wolf, one of Two Bear's students. Instead, he taught principles of balance, harmony, and the relationship between materials and natural forces. He would say, "I'm not teaching you to build rifles. I'm teaching you to hear the songs that all things sing when they are in perfect harmony with their purpose." Only later did I realize he was passing down the fundamental knowledge that had made his military work so revolutionary. In 1974, as the Vietnam War was winding down, Two Bears received an unexpected visitor at his home on the reservation. General William Westmoreland, who had commanded U.S. forces in Vietnam from 1964 to 1968, arrived without fanfare or entourage to meet the man whose innovations had influenced 3 generations of American military rifles. The content of their conversation remains unknown, but neighbors reported that the two men talked for hours. When Westmoreland departed, he left behind a small wooden box. After Two Bear's death, this box was found to contain a single spent cartridge casing with an engraved message. This round found its true path and brought a warrior home, with gratitude from the United States Army. CT. The most remarkable chapter in Two Bear's story, however, came to light only in 2018, when a comprehensive declassification of Vietnam-era special operations documents revealed the existence of Operation Whispering Arrow. This classified program, active from 1966 to 1972, involved deploying small teams of Native American snipers equipped with heavily modified rifles based on Two Bear's designs. These teams, composed primarily of Navajo, Apache, Blackfeet, and Cherokee marksmen, operated in the most remote regions of the Vietnamese highlands. Their mission was not conventional combat, but rather the protection of isolated villages from both Viet Cong intimidation and the excesses of South Vietnamese forces. In essence, they served as guardians, a role that aligned with Two Bear's evolving philosophy about the true purpose of his work. Lieutenant James Tallfeather, who commanded one such team, wrote in a recently declassified after-action report, "Our mission is fundamentally different from conventional combat operations. We are not here to take territory or achieve body counts. We are guardians of people caught between opposing forces. The rifles Two Bears has created for us are not weapons of war as much as they are tools of protection. With them, we can watch over vast areas, detecting threats long before they reach vulnerable communities and neutralizing those threats with minimal force and impact." These teams operated with extraordinary effectiveness, often maintaining security over areas exceeding 100 square kilometers with just 3 to 4 operators. Their specialized rifles, incorporating the most advanced versions of Two Bear's modifications, allowed for effective engagement ranges approaching 1,200 yards, capabilities that would not become standard even in specialized sniper units until decades later. Perhaps most significantly, the operational philosophy of these units, emphasizing protection over aggression, precision over firepower, and minimum effective force, reflected Two Bear's own evolving views on the proper application of his technologies. In many ways, these small teams represented the purest implementation of his vision. Warriors whose purpose was fundamentally defensive, using superior technology not to conquer, but to protect. As the Vietnam War ended and American forces withdrew, Operation Whispering Arrow was quietly disbanded. The specialized rifles were supposed to be destroyed to prevent the technology from spreading, but rumors persist that many team members somehow managed to bring their weapons home, where they remained hidden as treasured family heirlooms. Charles Two Bears passed away on November 12, 1986, at the age of 68. His official obituary made only passing reference to his military service, noting simply that he had provided technical assistance to the United States Marine Corps during World War II. There was no mention of his transformative impact on American military rifle design, his continuing classified work during the Korean and Vietnam eras, or the countless lives saved through his innovations. The funeral, held on the Blackfeet Reservation, was attended primarily by family and tribal members. However, witnesses noted the presence of several elderly military men who stood at a respectful distance throughout the ceremony. One attendee recalled, "These men wore no uniforms, but you could tell by their bearing they were military. After everyone had left, they approached the grave one by one. Each man placed a single rifle cartridge on the headstone, touched it briefly as if in blessing, and departed without speaking." For decades after his death, Two Bears remained largely forgotten by official military history. His contributions, though profound, were obscured by classification, institutional racism, and the complex politics of crediting indigenous innovation. His story might have remained buried forever, if not for the efforts of his granddaughter, Dr. Mary Two Bears, who began researching her grandfather's life while studying engineering at Montana State University in the early 2000s. "I grew up hearing stories about my grandfather's singing rifles, sound, Dr. Two Bears explained in a 2020 interview. The family knew he had done something important during the war, but the details were shrouded in secrecy. When I began studying mechanical engineering, I started to understand the true significance of the principles he had developed. What amazed me was how he had integrated traditional Blackfeet knowledge of natural forces with modern materials science, creating approaches that were decades ahead of their time. Her research, combined with the gradual declassification of World War II and Vietnam-era documents, began to reveal the true extent of her grandfather's contribution to American military technology. In 2010, she published The Singing Rifle, Indigenous Knowledge and Modern Warfare, a comprehensive analysis of her grandfather's innovations and their impact across 3 major conflicts. The book caught the attention of senior Pentagon officials, leading to a formal review of Charles Two Bears' contributions to national security. In 2012, a special ceremony was held at the Pentagon, where Two Bears was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. The citation acknowledged his revolutionary contributions to American military technology and the countless lives saved through his innovations. During the ceremony, then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates made a remarkable admission. For too long, the full extent of Charles Two Bears' contribution to American security has been obscured, classified, or simply uncredited. Today, we acknowledge not just his technical genius, but the profound wisdom of indigenous knowledge that informed his work, a wisdom our conventional engineering approaches often failed to appreciate or understand. The most enduring legacy of Charles Two Bears, however, may lie not in the rifles he modified or the awards belatedly bestowed upon him, but in the fundamental principles he discovered and applied. His approach, integrating traditional indigenous understanding of natural forces with modern materials and manufacturing, represented a radically different paradigm from conventional Western engineering. In 2015, the Department of Defense established the Two Bears Initiative, a research program specifically focused on incorporating indigenous knowledge systems into modern defense technology development. The program actively recruits Native American engineers, scientists, and traditional knowledge keepers, creating collaborative teams that approach technical challenges from multiple cultural and intellectual traditions. Dr. Robert Blackhawk, who directs the initiative, explained its significance. Two Bears showed us that there are other valid ways of understanding and working with the physical world beyond our standard Western scientific paradigm. Indigenous knowledge systems developed over thousands of years of careful observation and interaction with natural forces. When we integrate these approaches with modern science and technology, we often discover solutions that neither tradition could have produced independently. The initiative has already yielded significant innovations in areas ranging from materials science to sensor technology, though many applications remain classified. Perhaps most notably, a new generation of precision guidance systems based on principles of natural navigation used by indigenous hunters has demonstrated accuracy rates exceeding those of conventional GPS-based systems, particularly in environments where satellite navigation is compromised or unavailable. Today, on the Blackfeet Reservation, a small museum dedicated to Charles Two Bear's life and innovations stands as a testament to his legacy. The central exhibit features a single rifle, one of the few surviving examples of his most advanced modifications, displayed alongside traditional Blackfeet hunting tools. The accompanying text explains how principles derived from these traditional technologies informed Two Bear's revolutionary approach to modern weapons design. For young Blackfeet visitors, the museum offers more than just historical information. It provides a powerful message about the continuing relevance and value of traditional knowledge in the modern world, and about the capacity of indigenous people to make profound contributions to fields from which they have historically been excluded. As one young Blackfeet engineering student remarked after visiting the museum, Two Bears showed that our traditional knowledge isn't just cultural heritage to be preserved. It's living wisdom that can be applied to solve the most complex modern problems. He didn't have to choose between being traditionally Blackfeet and being a modern innovator. His greatest strength came from being both simultaneously. Perhaps the most powerful testament to Two Bear's legacy came in 2021, during U.S. military operations in Afghanistan. A specialized unit of Army Rangers found themselves pinned down in a remote valley, their communications compromised and GPS jamming preventing accurate air support. Their survival depended on their ability to neutralize enemy positions at extreme ranges under challenging environmental conditions. The unit commander later reported that what saved them was their specialized rifles, weapons that incorporated fundamental principles first developed by Charles Two Bears nearly 80 years earlier. The rifle's unique harmonization systems, designed to adjust automatically to environmental conditions, allowed for precision fire at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards, despite harsh winds and significant elevation challenges. We owe our lives to technology that began with an indigenous mechanic back in World War II, the commander stated in his after-action report. Every one of my men came home because a Blackfeet warrior from another era reached across time to protect us. As we conclude this incredible story, we are left to wonder, how many other Charles Two Bears are out there today? How many individuals from marginalized communities possess knowledge and insights that could revolutionize our approach to technology, medicine, energy, or countless other fields, if only they were given the opportunity and recognition? The story of Charles Two Bears is not just about rifles or warfare. It's about the untapped potential of diverse knowledge systems, the innovation that occurs at the intersection of different cultural traditions, and the extraordinary contributions that can emerge from unexpected sources when barriers of prejudice and classification are removed. Perhaps the most important lesson is this: true innovation rarely comes from following established paths. It emerges when we have the courage to listen to different voices, to integrate diverse ways of knowing, and to recognize that wisdom can be found in traditions that have been too often dismissed or devalued by mainstream society. As we face the complex challenges of the 21st century, from climate change to emerging security threats, the example of Charles Two Bears reminds us that some of the most powerful solutions may come from the very communities and knowledge systems we have historically pushed to the margins. The rifle may have been his medium, but his true gift was showing us a different way of seeing, a perspective that integrated the wisdom of generations with the possibilities of modern technology. In that integration lies not just a lesson about weapons design, but about how we might approach every technical and social challenge we face. And for those who have faith, there is perhaps an even deeper message in the story of Charles Two Bears. Throughout Scripture, we see God working through unexpected individuals, shepherds, fishermen, tax collectors, to change the course of history. Two Bears' gift for hearing the song of the rifle, his ability to perceive harmonies and patterns that others missed, can be understood as a form of divine insight granted to him for the protection of his fellow soldiers. In Exodus, we read how God filled Bezalel with the Spirit of God, with skill, ability, and knowledge in all kinds of crafts for the construction of the tabernacle. Perhaps Charles Two Bears was similarly blessed with divine insight for his crucial work, a modern Bezalel whose hands were guided by both ancestral wisdom and spiritual understanding. As Jesus taught, "The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going." So, too, innovation and insight can come from sources we neither expect nor fully understand. The story of Charles Two Bears reminds us to remain open to all the ways in which divine wisdom might manifest in our world, even through the unlikely medium of a rifle modification created by a Blackfeet mechanic in the midst of humanity's darkest conflict. In the end, Two Bears' legacy invites us not just to remember a forgotten hero, but to recognize the extraordinary potential that exists in every community and cultural tradition. It challenges us to create a world where future Charles Two Bears don't have to wait decades for recognition, where diverse forms of knowledge are valued from the outset, and where innovation emerges from the rich interplay of different ways of understanding our shared reality. As the sun sets over the mountains of the Blackfeet Reservation, the legacy of Charles Two Bears continues to inspire new generations of innovators who, like him, find their own unique way to make the metal sing.
At 11:32 on the morning of December 20th, 1943, Second Lieutenant Charlie Brown gripped the controls of his B-17 bomber over Bremen, Germany, watching 250 flak guns open fire on his formation. 21 years old, 0 combat missions completed, this was his first. The German anti-aircraft gunners below were not ordinary soldiers. They were officer candidate school trainees, elite, the best marksmen the Luftwaffe had, and they had been waiting for the American bombers all morning. Brown's aircraft was called Ye Old Pub. It carried 10 men and 6,000 pounds of bombs. The target was a Focke-Wulf 190 fighter aircraft factory on the outskirts of Bremen. Intelligence officers had warned the crews at the morning briefing that they would face hundreds of German fighters. What they did not mention was that the position assigned to Brown's bomber was the most dangerous slot in the entire formation. The men of the 379th Bombardment Group had a name for it: Purple Heart Corner, the edge of the formation, the spot where German fighters always attacked first because the defensive fire from neighboring bombers could not overlap effectively. New crews were often assigned there. Brown's crew was the newest of all. Before Ye Old Pub could release its bombs, a 20-pound cannon shell exploded directly in front of the cockpit. The plexiglass nose shattered. Temperatures at 27,000 feet were 60 degrees below zero. The wind now howled through the aircraft at over 150 miles per hour. The number 2 engine died instantly. The number 4 engine began overspeeding, forcing Brown to throttle it back to prevent catastrophic failure. The bomber slowed. The formation pulled ahead. Within seconds, Ye Old Pub was alone. German fighters saw it immediately. 12 to 15 Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s descended on the crippled bomber, like wolves on a wounded deer. The attack lasted more than 10 minutes. The number 3 engine took hits and dropped to half power. The oxygen system ruptured. The hydraulic lines burst. The electrical system failed. The tail section was torn apart by cannon fire. Sergeant Hugh Eckenrode, the tail gunner, took a direct hit from a 20mm cannon shell. He was killed instantly. Most of the other crew members were wounded. Brown himself caught a bullet fragment in his right shoulder. The extreme cold had frozen the oil in the defensive guns. Of the 11 machine guns mounted on the B-17, only 3 remained operational. Then the oxygen ran out. At 27,000 feet, the human brain cannot function without supplemental oxygen. Brown felt his vision narrowing. His hands went numb on the controls. Beside him, his co-pilot Spencer Luke was already unconscious. Brown's last thought before everything went black was that his crew was about to die on their very first mission. Ye Old Pub began to fall. The bomber dropped from 27,000 feet in an uncontrolled dive. The airspeed climbed past 300 miles per hour. The airframe shook violently. At any moment, the wings could tear off from the stress. But then something happened that defied all logic. At approximately 1,000 feet above the ground, Brown regained consciousness. The thicker air at low altitude had enough oxygen to revive him. He grabbed the controls and pulled back with every ounce of strength he had left. The B-17 leveled out just above the treetops of northern Germany. Brown looked around the cockpit. Blood everywhere. Wounded men everywhere. His tail gunner was dead. His bomber was destroyed, and he had just flown directly over a German fighter airfield. On that airfield, a Luftwaffe pilot named Franz Stigler was refueling his Messerschmitt Bf 109. He had already shot down 2 American bombers that morning. One more kill would earn him the Knight's Cross, one of Germany's highest military honors. He looked up and saw Ye Old Pub limping across the sky at barely 100 feet. If you want to see what Franz Stigler did when he caught up to Brown's dying bomber, please hit that like button. It tells YouTube to share this story with more people. And please subscribe if you have not already. Back to Stigler. Stigler climbed into his fighter. The engine roared to life. Within minutes, he was airborne and closing fast on the crippled American bomber. He positioned himself behind the B-17's tail, finger resting on the trigger of his twin machine guns and 20mm cannon. One squeeze. That was all it would take. The Knight's Cross would be his. But what Franz Stigler saw through his gun sight would change everything he believed about war, about honor, and about the enemy he had been taught to hate. Franz Stigler was 28 years old. He had flown 487 combat missions. He had been shot down 17 times. He had bailed out of burning aircraft 6 times and crash-landed damaged planes 11 more. His brother August, also a pilot, had died in 1940 when his Junkers 88 crashed during a night bombing mission over England. The war had taken everything from Stigler, except his skill and his code. Before the war, Stigler had been a commercial pilot for Lufthansa. He had flown passengers across Europe in peace. He had never imagined he would spend years killing men he had never met. But Germany had called, and Stigler had answered. By December of 1943, he was one of the most experienced fighter pilots in Jagdgeschwader 27. Now he was closing on the tail of a crippled American bomber with 27 confirmed victories to his name. One more heavy bomber would complete the requirement for the Knight's Cross. The medal would honor not just him, but his dead brother. It would prove that the Stigler family had given everything to Germany. His Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6 was not in perfect condition. Earlier that morning, during his attack on the first 2 bombers, an American .50 caliber bullet had lodged in his radiator. The engine was at risk of overheating, but Stigler had taken off anyway. The crippled B-17 was too easy a target to ignore. He approached from behind and below, the classic attack angle. His finger found the trigger. His gun sight settled on the tail section of the American bomber. And then, Franz Stigler saw something that made him lift his finger away from the trigger. The tail gunner's compartment was destroyed. Through the massive holes in the fuselage, Stigler could see the body of a young American slumped over his machine gun. Blood had frozen in long red icicles from the shattered turret. The man was clearly dead. Stigler pulled his fighter alongside the bomber and looked through more holes in the aircraft's skin. He saw wounded men trying to help other wounded men. He saw a crewman with blood covering his face. He saw another whose leg had been torn open by shrapnel. He saw the pilot and co-pilot struggling to keep the aircraft in the air. None of them were fighting. None of them could fight. They were just trying to survive. In that moment, Franz Stigler remembered the words of a man named Gustav Rodel. Rodel had been Stigler's commanding officer in North Africa, where Stigler had flown with Jagdgeschwader 27 against the British in the Libyan desert. Rodel was a different kind of German officer. He believed that war had rules. He believed that a fighter pilot's honor came not from how many enemies he killed, but from how he killed them. Rodel had once gathered his pilots and told them something that Stigler never forgot. You are fighter pilots. First, last, always. If I ever hear of any of you shooting at a man in a parachute, I will shoot you myself. The meaning was clear. A man in a parachute was defenseless. He could not fight back. Killing him was not combat. It was murder. And murder had no place in the code of a true fighter pilot. Stigler looked again at the shattered bomber beside him. The Americans were not hanging from parachutes, but they might as well have been. They had no working guns. They had no speed. They had no way to defend themselves. Shooting them down would not be a victory. It would be an execution. Stigler felt the weight of the rosary beads in his flight jacket pocket. His mother had wanted him to become a priest. He had chosen to fly instead. But he had never abandoned his faith, and his faith told him that what he was about to do would be a sin. He made his decision. Franz Stigler would not shoot down this bomber. He would not kill these men. He would not earn his Knight's Cross this way. But now, he faced a new problem. The American bomber was flying deeper into Germany. It was heading the wrong direction. If Brown continued on this course, he would fly over more German airfields, more anti-aircraft batteries, more fighter squadrons. Someone else would shoot him down. The crew would die anyway. Stigler had spared them. But sparing them was not the same as saving them. The German pilot pulled his Messerschmitt alongside the B-17's cockpit. He could see the American pilot staring at him through the shattered window. The young man's face was covered in blood. His eyes were filled with terror. He clearly expected to die in the next few seconds. Stigler raised his hand. He pointed down toward the ground. He was trying to tell the American to land at a German airfield and surrender. It was the only way the crew would survive. But Charlie Brown did not understand. He thought the German was telling him to go down, to crash, to die. Brown shook his head. Stigler pointed again. This time he pointed north, toward Sweden, neutral territory. If the Americans could reach Sweden, they would be interned, but alive. Medical treatment would be waiting. Brown still did not understand. He kept flying west, toward England, 250 miles across the North Sea in a bomber that was falling apart. Franz Stigler realized he had only one option left, and it was an option that could get him executed. Franz Stigler made the most dangerous decision of his life. He would not just spare the American bomber, he would escort it to safety. In Nazi Germany, this was treason. A German pilot who allowed an enemy aircraft to escape faced court-martial. If found guilty, the sentence was death by firing squad. There would be no trial, no defense, no appeal. Stigler knew exactly what he was risking. He did it anyway. He maneuvered his Messerschmitt Bf-109 into close formation on the left wing of the B-17. So close that the two aircraft were flying just feet apart. So close that from the ground, the silhouettes would merge into one shape. So close that any German anti-aircraft gunner looking up would see the distinctive outline of a Bf-109 and hold his fire. This was Stigler's plan. The Luftwaffe operated captured B-17s for training and secret missions. German ground crews were trained to recognize these aircraft. If they saw a German fighter flying in formation with an American bomber, they might assume it was one of their own captured planes being escorted. They might not shoot. It was a desperate gamble, but it was the only chance the Americans had. Inside Ye Old Pub, Charlie Brown watched the German fighter slide into position beside him. His heart pounded against his ribs. He had ordered his top turret gunner, Bertrand Coulomb, to aim at the German, but not fire. Brown did not understand what was happening. Was the German toying with them? Was he radioing for reinforcements? Was this some kind of trap? The B-17 continued west toward the North Sea. The German fighter stayed with it, mile after mile, minute after minute. Brown kept waiting for the attack that never came. They passed over farmland. They passed over villages. They passed over roads filled with German military vehicles. At any moment, someone on the ground could look up and see them. At any moment, a flak battery could open fire. At any moment, another German fighter could appear and ask why Franz Stiegler was flying alongside an enemy bomber instead of destroying it. But the minutes kept passing, and the German kept flying beside them. The coastline appeared ahead, the North Sea. 250 miles of freezing water between Germany and England. If Ye Old Pub could cross that distance, the crew would live. If the engines failed over the open ocean, they would die. But first they had to pass the coastal defenses. The German Atlantic Wall stretched along the entire coastline of occupied Europe. Anti-aircraft batteries, radar stations, observer posts. Every mile of beach was watched. Every aircraft that crossed the coast was tracked and identified. An American bomber flying low and slow toward England would be an easy target. Stiegler stayed in formation. He flew so close to the B-17 that his wingtip nearly touched the bomber's fuselage. He was daring the anti-aircraft gunners to fire. If they shot at the B-17, they would hit him too. If they recognized his aircraft, they would hold their fire. The gamble worked. The coastal batteries did not shoot. The radar stations tracked two aircraft flying in formation and assumed they were friendly. Ye Old Pub crossed over the beach and headed out over the gray waters of the North Sea. Franz Stiegler had done it. He had escorted an enemy bomber through the most heavily defended airspace in Europe. He had saved 9 American lives. But Stiegler could not follow them to England. His fuel was running low. His radiator was still damaged from the bullet lodged inside it. And if he landed in Britain, he would spend the rest of the war as a prisoner. He had to turn back. He had to return to Germany and pretend that none of this had ever happened. Stiegler pulled his fighter alongside the B-17 cockpit one last time. Charlie Brown was staring at him through the shattered window. Their eyes met. 2 young men from opposite sides of a terrible war, separated by a few feet of frozen air. Stiegler raised his hand to his forehead. He saluted the American pilot. Then he banked his Messerschmitt to the left and disappeared into the gray sky, heading back toward Germany. Brown watched him go. He still did not understand what had just happened. He did not know the German's name. He did not know why he had been spared. All he knew was that a man who should have killed him had chosen to let him live. But Charlie Brown's ordeal was not over. He was now 250 miles from England in an aircraft that was barely flying. 3 engines were damaged. The 4th was unreliable. The hydraulic system was destroyed. The crew had no oxygen, no heat, no working radio. 1 man was dead. 6 more were wounded. The morphine syringes had frozen solid and were useless for treating their injuries. And the North Sea in December was one of the most unforgiving bodies of water on Earth. Charlie Brown flew his dying bomber into the gray void of the North Sea. Below him, waves churned in the December cold. The water temperature was barely above freezing. If Ye Old Pub went down, the crew would survive no more than a few minutes before hypothermia killed them. The number 2 engine was dead. The number 3 engine was producing half power. The number 4 engine kept surging and fading unpredictably. Only the number 1 engine was running at full capacity. Brown needed at least 2 good engines to maintain altitude. He was flying on 1.5. The airspeed indicator showed 140 miles per hour, dangerously slow. Any slower and the bomber would stall and fall into the sea. Brown pushed the throttles forward, trying to coax more power from his damaged engines. The aircraft shuddered but held steady. Behind him, his crew was fighting to stay alive. The waist gunner, Alex Yelisenko, had taken shrapnel in his leg. The wound was severe. Without proper medical treatment, he would bleed to death. But the morphine syringes were frozen. The medical kit was useless. All his crewmates could do was apply pressure and hope. The ball turret gunner, Sam Blackford, had lost feeling in his feet. The electrical heating wires in his flight suit had shorted out during the attack. Frostbite was setting in. If he did not get warm soon, he would lose his toes, maybe his feet. The radio operator, Richard Pachout, had taken a cannon shell fragment to his eye. He could barely see, but he kept working, trying to repair the damaged radio equipment so they could call for help. Every few minutes, he would tap out a distress signal. No response ever came. In the tail section, Hugh Eckenrode's body remained where he had died. There was no way to move him. There was no time to mourn him. The living had to focus on staying alive. Brown calculated the distance in his head. 250 miles at 140 miles per hour. Nearly 2 hours of flight time. 2 hours in an aircraft that could fall apart at any moment. 2 hours over water so cold it would kill them in minutes. He did not know if they would make it, but he knew they had to try. Mile after mile, the B-17 limped westward. The engines coughed and sputtered. The airframe groaned under the stress of holding together. Brown's hands ached from gripping the controls. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet fragment had hit him, but he did not let go. He could not let go. 9 lives depended on him. After what felt like an eternity, the coast of England appeared on the horizon. Brown had never seen anything more beautiful in his life. Green fields, gray cliffs, home. But Ye Old Pub was too damaged to reach its home base at RAF Kimbolton. The hydraulic system was destroyed, which meant the landing gear might not extend. The flaps might not work. Brown would have to bring the bomber down on whatever airfield he could find. He spotted RAF Seething, home of the 448th Bomb Group, and lined up for approach. The landing gear came down, barely. The flaps partially extended. Brown brought Ye Old Pub onto the runway in a controlled crash that tore off the remaining landing gear and sent the bomber skidding across the tarmac in a shower of sparks. When the aircraft finally stopped, Charlie Brown sat motionless in the cockpit. His hands were still locked on the controls. His body was shaking. He had done it. He had brought his crew home. 8 men climbed out of Ye Old Pub alive. 1 was carried out dead. The bomber itself would never fly again. It was sent back to the United States and sold for scrap metal. At the debriefing, Brown told his intelligence officers everything. He described the German fighter that had appeared behind them. He described how the pilot had flown alongside instead of attacking. He described the salute before the German turned away. The officers listened in silence. When Brown finished, they gave him an order. He was never to speak of this incident again. The story was classified. No one could know that a German pilot had shown mercy to an American crew. It would create sympathy for the enemy. Brown obeyed. He kept the secret. 300 miles away, Franz Stigler landed his Messerschmitt at his airfield near Bremen. He told no one what he had done. If anyone discovered that he had escorted an enemy bomber to safety instead of destroying it, he would be court-martialed and executed. Stigler kept the secret too. 2 men on opposite sides of a war, each carrying a story they could never tell, each wondering if the other had survived, each haunted by a moment of humanity in the midst of destruction. The secret would last for 46 years. The war ended in May of 1945. Charlie Brown went home to West Virginia. He finished college, then rejoined the Air Force in 1949. He served in intelligence, rising through the ranks until he retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1972. He settled in Miami, Florida, and started a combustion research company. Franz Stigler survived the war, but lost everything else. Germany was in ruins. The Luftwaffe no longer existed. Stigler had flown the revolutionary Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter in the final months of the war, but even the world's first operational jet could not save his country from defeat. After the war, he struggled to find work in occupied Germany. In 1953, he emigrated to Canada and settled in Vancouver, British Columbia. He became a successful businessman and started a new life. Both men carried the memory of December 20th, 1943. Brown often thought about the German pilot who had spared him. He wondered who the man was. He wondered why he had shown mercy. He wondered if he had survived the war. But he had been ordered to keep the story secret, and for decades he obeyed. Stigler thought about the American bomber too. He wondered if it had made it across the North Sea. He wondered if the crew had survived their wounds. He wondered if saving them had been worth the risk. But he could never ask anyone. He could never tell anyone. The secret stayed locked inside him. 43 years passed. In 1986, Charlie Brown was invited to speak at a military aviation event called the Gathering of Eagles at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. Retired pilots from all branches of service attended. Someone asked Brown if he had any memorable combat stories. For the first time in over 4 decades, Brown told the story of the German fighter pilot. He described the shattered bomber. He described the enemy plane appearing on his wing. He described the salute before the German turned away. The audience listened in stunned silence. After the speech, something changed in Brown. He realized he needed to know what had happened. He needed to find the German pilot who had spared his life. He needed to thank him. The search began. Brown contacted the United States Air Force Archives. No records. He contacted the West German Air Force. No records. He wrote letters to military historians across Europe. No response. Months turned into years. Every lead went cold. The German pilot seemed to have vanished into history. By 1989, Brown was running out of options. He had spent 4 years searching with nothing to show for it. His friends told him to give up. The pilot was probably dead. Even if he was alive, finding one man among millions of German veterans was impossible. But Brown refused to quit. He wrote one final letter. This time, he sent it to a newsletter for former Luftwaffe pilots called Jägerblatt. He described the encounter in detail. He gave the date, the location, the type of aircraft. He asked if anyone knew who the German pilot might have been. The letter was published in early 1990. A few weeks later, Charlie Brown received a response. The envelope had a Canadian postmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting. The letter began with 3 words that changed everything. I was the one. Franz Stigler had read the newsletter. He had recognized the story immediately. After 46 years of silence, he had finally learned that the American bomber had made it home. The crew had survived. His decision to spare them had not been in vain. Brown read the letter with tears streaming down his face. Stigler described his aircraft. He described the escort over the coast. He described the salute. Every detail matched Brown's memory exactly. There was no doubt. This was the man who had saved his life. Brown called directory assistance for Vancouver, British Columbia. He asked for a number for Franz Stigler. The operator found it. Brown dialed with trembling hands. A voice answered. An old man with a German accent. Brown identified himself. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Franz Stigler began to cry. The 2 men talked for hours. They discovered that they had been living less than 200 miles apart for decades. Stigler in Vancouver, Brown in Seattle before he moved to Miami. They had been neighbors and never known it. They agreed to meet in person, that summer, in a hotel lobby in Florida. 2 enemies from a war that had ended half a century ago. 2 old men who had carried the same secret for 46 years, finally about to see each other face to face. On a summer day in 1990, Charlie Brown walked into a hotel lobby in Florida. He was 67 years old. His hair had turned gray. His body carried the scars of a war that had ended 45 years ago. But his heart was pounding like he was 21 again. Franz Stigler was waiting for him. He was 74 years old. His face was lined with age. His hands trembled slightly. But his eyes were the same eyes that had looked across at Brown through the shattered cockpit window over Germany. The 2 men saw each other across the lobby. For a moment, neither moved. 46 years of wondering. 46 years of silence. 46 years of carrying a secret that no one else would understand. Then they walked toward each other and embraced. A friend of Brown's had brought a video camera to record the reunion. The footage shows 2 old men holding each other and weeping. Their shoulders shake. Their voices break. They do not let go for a long time. When they finally separated, Stigler looked at Brown and the weight of nearly half a century lifted from his shoulders. He had wondered for so long whether his decision had mattered. Now he knew. The young pilot he had spared was standing in front of him, alive and whole. Brown had brought something to show Stigler. Photographs, not just of himself, but of his children and grandchildren. All the people who existed because Stigler had lifted his finger from the trigger in 1943. Stigler stared at the photographs. his eyes filled with tears again. He had never received his Knight's Cross. He had never been recognized by Germany for his combat achievements. But standing in that hotel lobby, looking at 3 generations of a family that lived because of him, Franz Stiegler realized he had received something far more valuable than any medal. 3 months later, in September of 1990, Brown and Stiegler attended a reunion of the 379th Bomb Group in Massachusetts. The veterans of Brown's old unit had invited Stiegler as their guest of honor. They wanted to meet the German pilot who had saved one of their own. 2 surviving crew members from Ye Old Pub were there. Sam Blackford, the ball turret gunner whose feet had nearly frozen during the flight home. Richard Pachout, the radio operator who had taken shrapnel in his eye. Both men had lived full lives after the war. Both men had children and grandchildren of their own. They embraced Stiegler with tears and laughter. They thanked him for the decades they had been given. They introduced him to their families. 25 people stood in that room who would never have been born if Stiegler had pulled the trigger. The reunion made Stiegler an honorary member of the 379th Bomb Group, a German fighter ace officially welcomed into an American bomber unit. Former enemies, now brothers. Word of the story began to spread. Newspapers picked it up. Television stations requested interviews. Brown and Stiegler found themselves invited to speak at air museums, civic organizations, and military gatherings across the United States and Canada. They traveled together whenever they could. The American bomber pilot and the German fighter ace standing side by side, telling their story to audiences who had never heard anything like it. Veterans in the crowd would weep openly. Young people would approach them afterward, shaking their hands, thanking them for sharing something so powerful. Stiegler gave Brown a book about German fighter jets. Inside the front cover, he wrote an inscription. He explained that in 1940, he had lost his only brother to the war. He wrote that on December 20th, 1943, 4 days before Christmas, he had been given the chance to save a B-17 from destruction. He wrote that the pilot of that bomber, Charlie Brown, had become as precious to him as his brother had been. He signed it with 2 words, your brother. Brown and Stiegler were no longer just friends. They were family. They talked on the phone every week. They visited each other's homes. They went fishing together. They celebrated holidays together. The bond between them was deeper than anything either man had experienced since the war. Their story reached audiences around the world. People wrote letters saying how much it had moved them. People said it had restored their faith in humanity. People said it proved that even in the darkest moments of war, compassion could survive. But for Brown, something was still missing. The men of Ye Old Pub had never received official recognition for what they endured on December 20th, 1943. The mission had been classified for decades. Their sacrifice had been erased from the official record. Brown decided to change that. He began writing letters to the United States Air Force. He wanted his crew to receive the medals they deserved. He wanted the world to know what they had survived. The Air Force began an investigation. Decades of classified files were finally opened. In 2008, the United States Air Force completed its investigation into the events of December 20th, 1943. The findings confirmed everything Charlie Brown had reported. The mission to Bremen, the devastating attack by German fighters, the death of Hugh Eckenrode, the wounds suffered by the crew, the miraculous flight home across the North Sea, and the German pilot who had chosen mercy over victory. The Air Force made a decision that stunned military historians. Each surviving crew member of Ye Old Pub would receive the Silver Star, one of the highest awards for valor in combat. For the crew members who had already died, the medals would be awarded posthumously to their families. 9 Silver Stars for 1 bomber crew. It was unprecedented. But the Air Force was not finished. Charlie Brown himself would receive something even rarer, the Air Force Cross, the second highest award that any member of the United States Air Force can receive. It is given only for extraordinary heroism in combat. No other World War II bomber crew had ever been collectively honored in this way. The men of Ye Old Pub became one of the most decorated crews in the history of American military aviation. 65 years after their mission, they finally received the recognition they deserved. The medal ceremony took place with great solemnity. Surviving crew members attended with their families. the families of the dead came to accept medals on behalf of fathers and grandfathers they had lost. Brown was there, 85 years old, his body frail but his spirit unbroken. And standing beside him, as he had stood for nearly 2 decades, was Franz Stigler. Stigler had received his own recognition years earlier. In 1993, the Combatants Federation of Europe had presented him with the Star of Peace. The award honored soldiers who had demonstrated exceptional humanity during wartime. Stigler was one of only a handful of German veterans ever to receive it. But Stigler always insisted that he did not deserve special praise. He had simply done what any honorable man would do. He had refused to murder defenseless men. He had followed a code that valued human life over military glory. He had answered what he called a higher call. The story of Brown and Stigler reached millions of people around the world. Journalists wrote about them in newspapers and magazines. Television programs featured their reunion. Documentary filmmakers interviewed them about their experience. In 2012, author Adam Makos published a book about their story. He called it A Higher Call. The title came from Stigler's own words about why he had spared the American bomber. Makos had spent years interviewing both men, traveling to the locations where the events had taken place, and researching military archives in the United States and Germany. The book became a New York Times bestseller. Readers were captivated by the story of 2 enemies who became brothers. Military historians praised the meticulous research. Veterans said it captured something essential about the nature of war and the choices men make within it. In 2014, a Swedish heavy metal band called Sabaton released a song about the incident. They called it No Bullets Fly. The song reached audiences who had never heard of Brown or Stigler. Young people around the world learned about the German pilot who had refused to kill, and the American pilot who had spent 46 years searching for him. In 2019, a surviving B-17 bomber operated by the Erickson Aircraft Collection in Oregon was repainted in the colors and markings of Ye Old Pub. The restored aircraft flew at air shows across the United States, keeping the memory of the original crew alive for new generations. The legacy of December 20th, 1943, had grown far beyond anything Brown or Stigler could have imagined. Their story had become a symbol of something larger than themselves. It proved that even in total war, even when nations demanded absolute hatred of the enemy, individual human beings could choose a different path. Franz Stigler had given up his Knight's Cross to save 9 American lives. In return, he had received something that no medal could represent. He had received a brother, a family, a legacy that would outlive him by generations. But by 2008, both men were growing old. Stigler was 92. Brown was 87. They had been given 18 years of friendship since their reunion, 18 years of phone calls, visits, and shared memories, 18 years that neither man had ever expected to have. Time was running out, and both of them knew it. Franz Stigler died on March 22, 2008. He was 92 years old. He passed away in Vancouver, British Columbia, the country that had given him a second life after the war. His body was cremated according to his wishes. Charlie Brown received the news in Florida. The man who had become his brother was gone. After 18 years of friendship, after hundreds of phone calls, after all the reunions and speaking tours and shared memories, Stigler had finally slipped away. Brown was devastated, but he was also at peace. He knew that Stigler had died knowing the truth. The B-17 had made it home. The crew had survived. The decision he made over Germany in 1943 had mattered. His act of mercy had rippled across generations. 8 months later, on November 24, 2008, Charlie Brown died in Miami. He was 87 years old. The 2 men who had met as enemies over the skies of Germany, who had become brothers across the divide of war, who had spent the last years of their lives telling their story to the world, were finally reunited. They had died the same year, just 8 months apart, as if one could not bear to live too long without the other. The legacy they left behind continued to grow. The book, A Higher Call, remained in print, introducing new readers to their story every year. The song, No Bullets Fly, brought their names to audiences who had never studied World War II. The restored Ye Old Pub flew at air shows across America, carrying their memory into the sky. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was the simplest one: the families. Hugh Eckenrode, the tail gunner who died over Bremen, had a grandniece who never forgot him. She tracked down a lithograph of Ye Old Pub and Stiegler's Messerschmitt from a German auction house and gave it to her father. For decades, the family had wondered what had happened to their uncle. Brown and Stiegler's story finally gave them answers. The descendants of the surviving crew members numbered in the dozens: children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, teachers, doctors, soldiers, artists. Every single one of them owed their existence to a German pilot who chose not to pull the trigger. At the reunions, when Stigler met these families, he was always overwhelmed. He had never expected to see the consequences of his choice laid out so clearly. A wall of faces, a crowd of lives, all because he had remembered the words of Gustav Rodel, all because he had refused to shoot men who could not fight back. Stigler once wrote a note to Brown that captured everything he felt. He explained that he had lost his only brother in 1940. He wrote that on December 20th, 1943, he had been given the chance to save a B-17 from destruction. He wrote that Charlie Brown had become as precious to him as his brother had been. He signed the note with 2 words: "Your brother, Franz." The story of Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler is not a story about war. It is a story about what survives when war is over. It is a story about honor that transcends nationality. It is a story about mercy that echoes across generations. 2 young men met in the sky over Germany in 1943. One had every reason to kill. The other had no way to survive. And in that moment, something happened that neither man could explain. Something that defied orders, defied hatred, defied everything the war demanded of them. Franz Stigler answered a higher call, and Charlie Brown spent the rest of his life grateful that he did. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about pilots who saved lives with mercy and honor. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Germany? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure Charlie Brown and Franz Stigler are never forgotten. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.